Andrew.
Yeah, so Haz, I appreciate you opening it up too, because some of this requires a lot of clarification so we can get to the heart of these positions.
Sure.
And you're welcome to ask me whatever you want. And if you think you have a point that needs to be clarified and you need to cut in, I'm not going to take any offense to that.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so to kind of dive in here, I did notice something of a contradiction, and this is why I'm focusing on the ownership portion, what you mean by ownership here in the means of production. To me, ownership is this belongs to me, the individual. You're making kind of a different claim here. I think that ownership of property is a way to exercise power. And I think that you're trying to control that exercise of power at the individual level. And perhaps regulation could be good for that. But can you just clarify one more time, because we just had the break, what you mean by ownership here? Because when you gave the example of the Chinese, you said, well, wait a second. What can happen is they have a rep, and if the rep isn't doing, or the right thing, they move to the next rep.
That's just the ability to get people's input in the political process, not necessarily the fundamental ownership. The ownership is that all of the land, for example, in China, is either owned by the state or it's owned by the cooperatives at the village level collectively, and they have the power to lease out the land to whoever they want. And these leases are never permanent. They're, a few decades or something.
What about individual interests? Individual interest for land ownership for just the sake of having it.
Yeah.
Well, how could that be an immoral proposition? How could that be a proposition in which you can say this is wrong for a person to do, to actually own a thing which is then theirs?
Well, because it's not a matter of morality, it's a matter of power and politics. To own land, to truly own it, you have to conquer it by the sword. That's how you own land.
You don't need to, why would that be an entailment that it must be conquered by the sword?
Because there is no ownership of land to anyone or anything in history that was not conquered forcefully.
Perhaps you could say certain groups come in and they take land, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes the land isn't even occupied, right?
Right.
They don't even need to use force. They just put up a flag and say, this is mine.
Yeah.
What makes it not theirs?
What makes it not theirs is, what makes it theirs historically from classical political economies, they'll say because their labor was used to cultivate the land and their labor is being used to participate in it, this is what makes it theirs. This is what makes it reflect their fundamental essence and their fundamental being, right? But when you have societies constituted by a very complex division of labor, where in order to produce the civilization itself at the aggregate level, you have a bunch of different moving parts and a bunch of different kinds of labor that are working together, that are necessary and indispensable for each other. I mean, if for a factory, you need, there's so many different specialized roles just for something like that, right? That's just at the factory level. Now think of it at the level of a country. There's so many different types of labor that are necessary for for a nation to exist, just to be able to feed itself and clothe itself and so on.
No disagreement there.
So how can we pin down, if you want to take this at a more moral level, that someone in particular is entitled absolutely to own this in the way that you're talking about, like at the level of sovereignty and power, when they are interdependent on others just as much as well?
Because if all we have is what's intuitive, and it seems like this is the system that you're advocating is intuition, I don't see how else you're advocating for anything other than and I'm going to be tongue-in-cheek a bit here, my preferences, right, and my intuition. Intuitively, people seem to want to own things themselves. They want those things to be theirs. They don't want them to be collective. For instance, right? I own my wife. Now, I don't mean ownership the same way that I would maybe own this studio or something like this.
Yeah.
But I think you understand the gist, or the Geist, as Hegel would say, of what I'm getting at here. She's mine. I'm not sharing her. I'm not sharing my kids, right?
Now, aside from the wife thing, we can get into that later. But let's just say this mug. This is your mug. I want to drink out of it. I don't want to share with anyone else. It's mine. No. This is, I get what you're saying now.
Yeah.
This is my mug. I use it for something. It's mine. I'm the one who uses it, and it's mine, right? So you're giving content to it. You're using it in a way that is reflective of your humanity, reflective of your existence, and of course, any civilization recognizes and respects those boundaries. That this is yours because this is what you use, right? But here's the problem: capitalist private property isn't just about I want to use this, and that's what defines its exclusivity. It's about an institution where you're pledging fundamental means of production and resources that we all depend on and all rely upon for the sole and exclusive purpose of making a profit. Not even necessarily making profit for like a predefined goal of like, I want to get rich, I want to have a yacht with women, and I want to have a luxurious life. Even that would be more compatible with communism, because at least there's a goal that's human at the end of it, right? But the capitalist system doesn't have human goals. It's a maddening process of capital just self-expanding blindly only for the purpose of profit.
That's 5 minutes there. I was going to just let him
Can we extend it for a minute?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, go ahead. So I'll put 2 minutes, 1 o'clock. Go ahead.
These systems don't exist in a vacuum. When you say a capitalist system, you're talking about people. These are human beings who are at the heads of these systems. I don't believe that just because you're a capitalist, you're a monster. Of course, you don't believe that either.
No.
Nor if you're invested in a capitalist system, you're a monster.
No.
Clearly, though, people want to individually be able to have at least some autonomy, law, right? Law of yourself, to own things which are theirs and they share with nobody. It's not yours. It's not to help you. It's not to do anything for you. And you can go fuck yourself, right?
But that's just a personal use. That's for personal consumption.
Yeah, but the thing is like, why is it that would in any way? Well, but hang on. You said when I asked about private land ownership, you said, no, you can't own that unless it's benefiting somebody else.
Oh, no. Okay. There's a misunderstanding there. Okay. I can clarify. I'm talking about, for example, owning fundamental means of production that like everyone relies upon, right? And you just saying, I want this just because I want it for no reason. Yeah. Well, that's if you want it just because you want to use it exclusively, that's still a reason, right? That's not for no reason. That's not an arbitrary thing. There's civilization, and it varies by what civilization we're talking about, recognizes boundaries by which, privacy of the individual is recognized. See, this is the thing that I think is so difficult, and I think this is maybe the language stuff you were talking about earlier, that, Marxists are obfuscating language. Well, it's because things didn't always mean what they mean to us now, like private property. We think of private property, we're like, this is my lawn, it's private property, fuck off and don't come on my lawn. Like, oh, that's private property. But in reality, the private part of private property wasn't that it was an exclusively individual or human use. It was that this was institutionally cast off for a reason that is totally antisocial, totally incompatible with civilization. Culminating in capitalism was just money for money's own sake.
Well, can you give me an example of what you mean when you say this? An example of private property being utilized this way when you say, well, what it actually is.
I would say when banks own so many homes that are meant for people to live in, just for purposes of speculation and just for purposes of generating fictitious capital and fictitious profits that are not even productive. This is exactly what I'm talking about. A bank owns an asset.
Well, hang on, I'm sorry. Yeah. Let's back up. I'm talking on the individual level. Before we get to the corporate level.
That's the beautiful thing about what I'm talking about here. That's the kicker. We tend to think that capitalism promotes individual ownership and individual autonomy or whatever, but the opposite is true. Capitalism has led to banks owning everything, not individuals. And to me, that is exactly the consequence of the system of private property itself.
Yeah, but how would communism itself, the way that you are promoting it here, is not really telling us why we wouldn't just be shifting from bankers owning everything to just Group A owning everything. If you believe in force doctrine, Group A, in this case, government's just going to own everything. They'll allocate the housing how they see fit instead of the bank. It seems like all you're doing is shifting from one person who owns everything and is then utilizing speculation, everything else in order to, profit themselves, to just another group doing the exact same thing.
Well, I would say, although there's no guarantees that it would be perfect, I would say it would be an improvement. Why? Because the banker is accountable to no one. It's my private property. I can do whatever the fuck I want with it, and I'm accountable to no one. Even if you have a corrupt...
HAZ, hang on.
Yeah.
Who the hell are you accountable to when you have the force doctrine on your side? Banks...
What do you mean?
One thing banks don't have... banks themselves don't have force doctrine. They rely on governments who they bribe to protect them from, the people or whatever.
They own the government.
Sure.
Yeah.
But in this case, all you're doing is shifting the goal to the government doing the exact same thing you're claiming these banks are doing.
On what
now
basis?
They have all the machine guns too. What redress do you think the people have?
Okay, so even if we're talking about a corrupt authoritarian government that's communist or something, right? Even if it's corrupt.
Wasn't that all of them?
No.
No?
No, they weren't fundamentally corrupt. But even then, even if we assume they were, it's still better Because even in order for them to not get overthrown instantly, right, they have to at least justify themselves on the basis that this is what we're using it for and have to be held to that standard. Even if it was corrupt, that's better than if a banker owns everything or bankers own everything for totally antisocial purposes, just to, systemically dysfunctional purposes, right? Ones that don't even make rational economic sense, just for the purposes of making money, but the money's backed up by nothing and it's self-multiplying because of the way interest works, and it's totally negating its own fundamental premises. It's not being reinvested.
Even if I agree that this could be superior to a banker class, right? Yeah. It seems like neither class is necessary for humans to be dominant. So humanity can still move towards its interests, absent having an authoritarian, autonomous, communist government.
What's an example of that, though?
So an example of people self-governing during Jackson's day, this happened often. So you can look at an example in American history. Often this was the case, that people self-governed, especially around land ownership. Now, you talk about people who bought up large swaths of land. That's true. But originally, you have to remember that that was done away with as well. You could not buy up X amount of acreage if it was outside of the public use. So the reason for this is they wanted to stop those monopolies from happening. So I agree with you in this sense, that it's okay.
But they happened.
Under communism, the same exact types of things happened.
Like what? Like what do you mean?
Like the government now, you just have shifted the means of ownership.
But when has this happened under a communist government?
What? Which thing?
When has a creditor class, a monopolistic class, been able to just come and take over everything?
Who has it? So you're just shifting the authority from the bank to the government. So when does this happen under communism? Hang on. It always happens under communism. It's just that you shift who owns the means of production to the authoritarian portion instead of the banker portion. It's the same thing.
But at the worst, a communist government is mismanaging. They're not fundamentally using the resources for an antisocial private goal.
So, okay, when you say...
Or else, if they are, then it's like the collapse of the Soviet Union, where oligarchs just come and they just say, it's no longer communism.
But when you say antisocial goal, what do you mean by antisocial goal?
One that in no way is accountable to the public and to publicly accountable and stated and enunciated goals, like the 5-year plans they have to draft up.
That's all private property ownership. I don't have to account for what I do with my private property to the public. It's none of their fucking business.
You're right, but a communist party does.
Yeah, right, exactly. So the thing is if I'm under the communist party, right, and I have my private property, do I have to give it a fucking accounting to them of what I'm doing with my private property? If I own 300 acres and,
what do you mean?
There's an eaves there, or there's something in the public domain,
under communism, all of the fundamental means of production, including land, will be owned in common. Now, if you're leasing out the land, let's say, to the state, and you have the rights to the lease one way or another because historically your parents had it or whatever, do you have to be accountable for everything? I mean, no. I mean, look, you think Chinese fruit stand sellers have to report to the government everything they're doing? Absolutely not. There's even more. It's even ironic. They have more autonomy and freedom and wiggle room than here.
The government's turning a blind eye to it for the purpose of social cohesion.
Well, it's not that they're turning a blind eye. It's that they're not interested in just meddling and interfering with people's day-to-day lives. But
there's no benefit.
What the Communist Party is ensuring, though, right, is that people in the course of just living their lives normally are doing so in a way that is harmonious and compatible with the reproduction of civilization. This is the problem in America is not necessarily there's too much government or too little government. It's that we're not holding ourselves to the standard of being reproduced as a civilization. So antisocial values can be freely cultivated. Pornography, OnlyFans, you name it. These are things that are not compatible with a functioning civilization.
These things under communism. So let me give you
what is one
example
of a communist?
Abortion completely thrived under communism, is only stamped out by Stalinists because they were extinguishing their civilization. The great abortion advocates in feminism were, in fact, communists. Some of the greatest abortion advocates. That is not conducive.
I don't think that's true at all. I think that what you're talking about is that abortion was legalized and relaxed initially because they eliminated all of the civil codes. But even the I wouldn't call them feminists, but even Alexandra Kollontai, for example,
you don't think she was a feminist?
No, I don't. Even though she was in favor of the legalization
She's considered one of the great feminist minds of our time, HAZ.
By Western feminists, sure, but in Russia, that's not how she would be regarded. But anyway, look. The point is, even they recognized that even if it was to be legalized, they didn't think it was a good thing. They thought it was a necessary evil, and that their idea was that, it's harm reduction because people are doing it anyway because these are wartime conditions and it's very dangerous to their health. And they said, our goal is to eliminate this, but we're just going to make it legal so it's less dangerous to them. Now, we could disagree with that or agree with that. That's not necessarily my point. But even when communist countries allow for abortion, and many of them banned it, by the way, at different periods, I don't think there's any states in history that were more aggressively pro-natalist in terms of how much they were trying to pursue these policies than communist states. Let's remember that. But even in the cases where it is legalized,
but that came later, Haz. You have to concede that came later.
We're talking about the first 10 years of the Soviet state.
But the thing is they foresaw that when they looked at how many abortions were happening, they went, oh shit, this is not going to be good for the numbers that we need for the state that we want. They didn't have any moral qualms with abortion itself. There was nobody out there moralizing about the great evil of abortion inside of these communist nations. Kollontai most certainly was not. And many of the feminists, who I would consider to definitely be feminist thought leaders who worked alongside Stalin, were not. They were doing everything, in fact, to promote abortion inside these communist nations. I think that is antithetical.
But who is promoting abortion?
I can give you a massive list, and you can also go to Occult Feminism. My wife wrote it. Yeah. She gives an entire list. But Kollontai is another one. These people worked directly with the Soviets. The Soviets definitely, well, before they were even really Soviets, as communism comes in, definitely abortion is something which was running rampant all over the place.
That's not really this is not an inherently communist thing. This is just a modernity thing. And
that wasn't that modern, right? What do you mean by modernity?
Because many European countries,
free birth control.
Many European countries had already laxed their abortion rights at that time. This is not a uniquely communist thing at all.
Which ones?
I can't name them off the top of my head, so I could concede that. But look it up. So they had already legalized it in some of them.
Yeah, some of them, maybe. But the thing is like, no, this was not considered a good thing at this time in history.
The communists themselves did not regard abortion ever as a good thing. I would like one example where communists are promoting it as a good thing.
I would say if you're morally...
What was this year time that you guys were talking about specifically with abortion being a thing?
He's trying to say that... I mentioned how there's
what years? That's all
abortion was legal in the Soviet Union up till 31 or 30, I forget exactly.
That's all I want to know the time so the audience understands.
So neutrality on an issue like abortion is in of itself an evil. Saying I'm neutral to the murder of others is in and of itself an evil.
Listen, I respect your opinion. I think there should be room for opinions like that, but it's not everyone's opinion, for the world. For the world's majority. It's even in the strictest Islamic countries that have Sharia law, they still make exceptions where abortion can be allowed. Even in the most extreme religious conservative countries in the world, they don't ban every kind of instance of abortion. But regardless, I don't want to get into a debate about abortion.
But that wasn't what they were doing. They weren't like, oh, the mother's life is in jeopardy.
Yes, what did you think?
No, they were making an allowance for any case. Where a woman wanted to have one, they could have one. They had nothing to do with the health
their
and
moral codes. They had moral codes about how communists should behave. And they shouldn't be promiscuous. They shouldn't be sleeping around and doing whatever. They promoted morality. They weren't just telling everyone to... And so the original point, though, is that we're talking about antisocial things like pornography and OnlyFans and prostitution, all these things.
I consider that to be an antisocial thing.
Right, but every communist state, you said, well, communists promote things like that. Every communist state totally cracked down, eliminated, and banned all of those things.
What? Which things?
Prostitution, pornography, all this sex industry in general.
Yeah, sure. The kind of tightness which was around there, but so did fascist states. They did the exact same thing. Fascist states will also clamp down on moral degeneracy. This is not a point towards communism.
Fascist states... I would say fascist occupied countries were hypocrites. They would claim that, we're against degeneracy, and they would target the degeneracy on a superficial level. But as far as the root causes of the degeneracy, they would leave a blind eye to it.
Yep.
The Nazis, when they occupied Europe, they would establish institutionalized brothels where they would... I'm just telling you, they didn't eliminate prostitution.
Yeah, but you're moving the goalpost. Hang on. Saying, well, wait a second. They did the exact same thing that the communists did by outlawing it. They did. You're just making the claim, they weren't going after the root, which is capitalism.
Right, so they didn't eliminate it.
You have failed to demonstrate, though, that capitalism itself was the root of the problem. And the thing is like, look, they cracked down on the same sorts of degeneracy inside of fascist states And you don't need communism nor fascism to crack down on this. This type of degeneracy comes from egalitarian principles. It comes from equality principles. It does not come from theological principles.
So
it
is
does not come from
communism
religious principles.
egalitarian?
I think fundamentally it proposes egalitarianism.
So why were communists so severely against moral and cultural degeneracy then?
Because I think it wasn't in the interest of the state to pursue those things. But I just gave you an instance where the ultimate degeneracy, which is murder in the womb, they definitely stayed completely neutral.
I think the sex industry is a much more fundamental evil than a case where some abortions are allowed.
I'd rather that there be prostitutions than dead babies.
I mean, again, I understand it's a contentious issue, and there's a lot of extremes. For example, the United States, liberal states had very extreme lax abortion law, right?
Great.
Where you can terminate at 8 months and 9 months.
California, New York.
Nowhere in the world was this. I mean, it's unthinkable in liberal Europe. It's unthinkable anywhere in the world. I don't think this is an egalitarian issue.
Then why
it's
are you
a liberal
to states
problem.
Where they promote the most forms of egalitarianism they possibly can under the idea, even surpassing equality to equity, saying, okay, equality is not even enough, has to be equitable, right? Where now, if your box isn't big enough, at the analogy you've heard this, right? The box isn't big enough, we have to build you a bigger box so you can look over the fence too.
Well, let me ask you a question. Why take them at face value? They say we want to have equity for all of these oppressed minorities. Why take them at face value?
I don't take communists at face value.
Well, communists have results, and meanwhile, what Kamala Harris has is promising World War III, more funding for Israel, and more enriching of the capitalist class. So, but here's the issue, right? This talk of equity and stuff, how is it not clear that this is just a way to stem the majority working class populistic currents in your country? If I'm constantly propping up minorities as a political tool, it's not that I want everyone to be equal or it's about egalitarianism. It's just a political strategy to demoralize the working class majority.
You're absolutely right. But that being said, I can concede the point that this type of class warfare is being utilized on purpose to create division among individual people. You and I both agree that that's true. Yeah. Okay, there's no dispute there. But saying that communism, the answer to this, is to strip autonomous property rights, period, right? Which is basically what your position reduces to. Seems like you're really throwing the baby out with the bathwater here.
I want to draw from the spirit of the Communist Manifesto, which is like, we don't want to strip the autonomous property rights of the individual because capitalism has already done this. Capitalism has enslaved and immiserated this entire nation with debt such that even business owners, and this is the quintessential example that we're told of free enterprise, majority of them are in debt. They don't own everything. They're in debt. They have to pay mortgages. They have to pay interest on the loans that they took out. And how many of them are actually profitable? Even the biggest corporations in this country are in debt. They are not autonomous. Even the largest, most, you name them, Starbucks, McDonald's, whatever, they all are in debt, and it's ultimately the bankers and the financial institutions that control everything.
In debt. They get obscene profits, and they report that they have a lot of debt, so they don't have to pay taxes.
That's true.
They're not in debt.
That's only true for the industries that collateralize.
That's most industries.
No. The industries that collateralize the loans that creditors give out. This is oil. This is energy. And on that account, you're right. This is what the oil industry does.
Going back to force doctrine, right? Who gives a shit how much debt you have when you have the most powerful military on planet Earth with a navy that can say, "Oh, we'll just blow you up, fucker."
But who owns that military?
The United States government owns it and deploys it.
But if the government is in debt and 50% of my income taxes are going to servicing the interest on the national debt, then our government is clearly occupied and controlled by the